I feel like if I was to say what the most important thing to come out of our time with each other today was that despite the fact that we all come from such divergent contexts, there was this real sort of overriding sense of the value of each other, and that we came for that, and that just in this small amount of time that everybody kind of had this burning sense that the others in the room really had something that they could take something tangible from, and something useful and something wonderful. And I think that a lot of people's focus was about coming into this week for their own development, how they can be surrounded by these other young cultural leaders, learn from what their modus operandi is, or how they deal with challenges and so on, and then take that back into their own. The interesting thing was that everyone was turning to the value of their peers, and the fact that it wasn't the need for the self-improvement in your own situation wasn't sort of a self-centric thing. It was about being able to borrow from the people around us in a really kind of humble way. And I thought that was great, because I felt like that, but then I heard it in all of these really different contexts, but we were sort of saying the same thing. So I think that even it's funny, because we all expressed a desire to have wanted that in this process, but we kind of gave it to each other today in our meeting, which is kind of secretly wonderful. And then we talked about, we kind of moved from personal experience and issues, back out, pulling sort of the lens back out again. I know there was a few people, like Seb, one of the participants in the meeting, that was interested and ruminating on the difference. I think that it was spurred from Malinga's talk this morning, about the sense of authentic art coming naturally, bubbling out of the community experience, and that not being something that's imposed on them. And he's really concerned, and was sharing with the group, and everyone was kind of feeding back about what institutionalising something actually is, and whether it changes if it then gets institutionalised, and also what authentic art is. And that sort of fed into things like another participant, Tom, saying about having to operate a project from two different funding or support bodies, where their perspective on what the outcome should be was so different. And that moved into us discussing ideas of process versus product, and also social work and that moved us into social work as art, or art as social work. And that's when, I know from my work at the moment's perspective about that it inadvertently is being effective social work, and I'm not trying to impose that, and it's sort of coming at me, and that in itself is a challenge, because it kind of subverts that sense of me going in and imposing better conditions and improving these people in the community that I work with. And then that kind of instigated, I think that somebody said something really great to us, which I think is important as a quote to remember for the day. And he said that we're all here as amazing, I think he said amazing, I don't want to misquote him, as amazing individuals, and not representatives of our specific organisations. And even though there has kind of been this sense of the organisation and our role in the organisation, and that it's about, let me just have a look at my notes so I can tell you the right thing, that it's about us being ourselves, and sitting with all of the skills and the perspective that we have, and creating new conceptual frameworks about value. And I think that ties into what we've been talking about, and questioning about what is value, and also, again, reiterating how incredibly diverse, for want of a better word, everyone's individual contexts are, but there's a universality in that.
There was one very beautiful message on these talks what we had, to grab all these good, useful things and to use it in our homelands. So there is nice story how I discovered one community in Bratislava during this 2 days talks, and this English-speaking community in Bratislava. There is thousands of English-speaking people who doesn't speak Slovak, and we forgot about them, and now we can make something what make our theater more closer to them. So.
We really had valuable comments that enlightened everybody, let's say, and everybody had the moment where they said, oh yeah, this is something I really have to apply at home. And the whole time I was thinking of, I mean, we do these really big events, and I think we do them really good and we're really professional in them, but still there's always a reshaping, rethinking of the things we do and how we deliver the message. And in the last days I really got a new idea or the vision how to redefine and reform, use another wording for that, what we're doing, the value of the culture and arts that we present and what it means for the future and how we form future societies and how we really influence communities. And the discussions about it's not only about the economical impact, it's not about only the artistic impact we have in the moment, it's really about the future and what we're doing.
Some of the key words that were offered from the different panelists included that arts organizations or arts in general provoke new ideas, engage the community, connect with the community. They were talking about looking towards the future. They also talked about that the arts organizations and arts in general simply connect human beings with one another. And an interesting quote that I wrote down was, "Power is not held, it is transferred to empower." And I think those two key words about empowerment, the role of arts to inform a community, and this is where civic action comes into place, and this is where it really touched me in terms of the relevance of this particular panel discussion, is that we really can effect change if we come together and we collaborate. But we can only do that through different mediums and methods of connecting. Another thing that came up when one of the panelists talked about her festival in Hong Kong, which I noted, which maybe wasn't so highlighted, was the freedom of expression in a young democracy. So we're based in South Africa. Our democracy is also young. It's 18 years. In Hong Kong, it's 15, she said. And of course, democracy is not perfect, especially when it's so young. And so we, even in a fairly democratic society, we also grapple with freedom of expression. And how to freely express yourself without pandering to different agendas, especially when resources are attached to those particular agendas. And then, very interestingly, was the panel discussion from the Mulenga Kapwepwe, which resonated with us in an African context. She's the chair of the Zambian National Arts Council. And she listed all the, basically the criteria for what creates a conducive environment for the arts, mainly from a Western point of view. We talk about adequate arts infrastructure, good concentration of artists, private and public subsidies, etc. And in an African context, all these are missing. Yet you have these huge festivals and people will walk, she quoted, 51 kilometers to attend these festivals and sleep in the open air because there's something relevant about them. There's something that actually engages and interests the community, whether it's through the workshops that upskills individuals, whether it's connecting with people, whether it's about getting a greater sense of community through the arts. So I think those, those keywords really helped, I think, inform our work. To revisit what we do and how we engage with the community and really focus on our relevance.
As a participant suggested, how do cultural institutions keep up with emerging groups and new ways of perhaps recreating culture that the institutions represent that isn't being incorporated yet? And I'm not from a cultural institution, I'm from a science museum, which, you know, there's a debate as to whether you could probably be a cultural museum, a cultural institution and a science museum, but I don't identify with the art world as many of these participants do. And as sort of sitting back and observing the reactions to that participant's comment, it occurred to me that there's a bunch of institutions in the world right now that have a precious thing that they're protecting. And I think of journalism's precious is the story, and museums' precious is the object, and libraries' precious is the book. And it seems to me that cultural heritage institutions' precious is their historical identity. And so to me it seems that people are protecting that. And to invite these emerging groups is not trivial, as one of our members of our group said, you know, how do you keep up with all that and constantly redefine yourself is also very difficult. So I think that there is a balance, but that balance, the door needs to be open. There needs to be an invitation to those emerging groups.
I think when we look at guarding that precious thing, that thing that defines our organizations, whether it is culture, and for many folks today on our panel, it was a referencing of cultural things that identify them to their communities and how you reach their communities and how you continue to make those things relevant. It struck me that a lot of the conversation was coming from what I know best about my community is that they want to see this, and that's why I protect this thing, this precious, this cultural, whatever it is. And I think we have to be innovative in terms of how we redefine that culture again. You know, do we present it as a new thing? One of our panelists talked about this very traditional musical style, and you normally see it presented this way. However, this group came back and did it in a hip-hop way and indicated that there was some pushback, but now it's like this big new music. So we've seen kind of, to take what Becca said, an evolution of the precious into this next thing. And I think for myself, being an indigenous native to North America, I would indeed struggle with those things in how we present my culture so that I am indeed being respectful, as it would be seen by my community, but also challenging them to say that, you know, this is not only the context that you have to define the culture in. The other thing is how you know, I reach my community, making sure that I am culturally fluent. Just because I'm a part of that culture doesn't mean that I necessarily know all the time. And we also heard that today is that, oh no, I don't think my community would do that, and I don't think da-da-da-da-da. Well, I need to know, I don't need to just think about it. And so some of the ways that our institution, and we talked about this, how we bring in people into our communities is that I let community folks use our space for meetings so that they get used to coming into this space. So I'm not necessarily programming for what I think you need and what you want to see, but opening up a dialogue. So when you come into my space and they ask, oh, well, what do you do here? I can say, you know, what do you want to see here? You know, what would make you want to come to this place and be a participant in what we're offering here in our community? So that was kind of part of what we talked about today, you know, guarding the precious, guarding the cultural, being culturally relevant, being aware of, you know, our cultures, whatever that is. So yeah, it was just very interesting to be able to talk about that and to have group discussion on that. One of the other things that we talked about, and I think you could probably speak better on that, is how we can evaluate what we do. And I thought it was very interesting, your thought process, which I don't know that we have anything like that.
Yeah, so what Yona's referring to is that in science museums, we evaluate regularly. It's just part of what we do. And when it comes to new things or new audiences, deciding what that is something you can't just ask, what do you want your science museum to have in it? And you can't ask that for art or cultural institutions either, really, although it may be different. And so we do a lot of observation, and we have this text, it's called Learning Science in Informal Environments, that describes strands of engagement. And so we can observe how people interact with our content based on their behaviors. So it's qualitative and observational in nature, which I think would affect any institution represented here. And it's stuff like they're experiencing enthusiasm, or they're using tools, or they're identifying as a scientist or artist, or using scientific terms. The voting on scientific behavior or scientific issues. So having that is very nice, and it allows us to try new things that can fail, because we can measure it and say, well, this is hitting the mission, and that's so hard to figure out how something's hitting the mission. So I think that it's a real gift in our field, and I hope that the cultural and art institutions have something similar.
Right, and I think in our art field, whether a show is a great success or not is a big indicator in terms of how the leadership is of that organization. And I was sharing with our group that my organization is new, and while funding is an issue in everybody's organization, it's not the primary issue in my organization. So I get to try things, and if they fail, it's all right. Mm-hmm. Because we don't have necessarily the technologies to always reach our community in terms of surveying, internet is very minimal where I live. A lot of people don't have computers at home, and they don't even have cell service just because of the terrain. So I get to bring stuff and try it out. We brought our state symphony. I didn't know if it would be a hit or not, but I thought it was something interesting and new. And so we put it in our 1,000-seat venue, and we had about 150 people, which I was interested for the 150, but not very excited that we only had 150 in our 1,000-seat venue. And then our smaller venues, you try something that you think is going to be small and intimate, everybody comes out for it. So you don't have enough room, so what do? So being able to find a way to look at our arts participants to see that, yes, we are meeting the needs of our community, and then also having the luxury to be able to kind of play around and try things all the time, and for them to be able to come back to us and say, yes, that's what we want, as opposed to me saying that's what you need.
Yep, totally.